Rabbi Angela Buchdahl, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Dana. Thanks for having me.
So I want to start here. We have a few things in common, okay? Mm-hmm. First of all,
besides a mutual friend,
we have a mutual friend, and also your family member. We both went to the Lady Gaga concert at Madison Square Garden
together,
and we were both clues in Jeopardy.
No way!
Yes.
I love that.
Tell us about that. I love how you start the book.
Well, as a child who was born in Seoul, who has interfaith parents, and growing up in a outpost in the Pacific Northwest of the Jewish community, the idea, if you would have told me when I was 5 years old that one day I would be the Jeopardy answer to what is a rabbi, I would have said, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. Right. But that's sort of the unlikely story. So yes, that happened in a couple of years ago, and I thought, like, this is a surreal thing.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
Did anybody answer it correctly?
They did. They answered it correctly.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. That's good.
Did.
I think they got mine right as well, indeed. Can we start at the beginning?
Sure.
Oh, wait. I have one other thing we have in common.
What's that?
Well, kind of. All right. Your mother was Buddhist.
She still is.
Is a Buddhist. And I grew up Lutheran. Mm-hmm. And I did all the things. Sunday school, youth group, bell choir.
Okay, so we both loved religious school. Is that what you're going to say?
All the things. I didn't go to religious school, but Sunday school was my thing.
Uh-huh.
Although I had an argument with my sister every Saturday. I wanted to go to the early church service, and she wanted to go to the later one. Mm-hmm. But because for me, if we went to the early one and had to go to Sunday school, we got home in time to watch the Sunday shows. Oh. And my sister didn't care at all about the Sunday shows. But the other thing is that I go to freshman year of college, state school in Southern Colorado, and I come home at Thanksgiving, and I tell my dad, after taking this history of religions course, that I'm going to become a Buddhist.
Really?
And he was like, what are you talking about? Because your parents invest in you in terms of the morals and the values and the traditions. But I was always drawn to the gentleness and the spiritualness of Buddhism. And I was just curious about that as a kid. As you look at it, growing up, knowing about it, and then looking around now, there is something really beautiful and a nice thread that runs through all of the religions. And I wanted to ask you, maybe if we could start there.
Yeah. I mean, even though this is a memoir of a rabbi, which I am, the first chapter begins with my mother and a pilgrimage we took to Mount Rainier, which is sort of the mountain of the Pacific Northwest. And it towers over the skyline. And it was a real pilgrimage for my mother. And in many ways, it was in nature that my mom taught sort of her Buddhist philosophy to me. And when we got up on that mountain and she made us carry a little portable charcoal grill so that she could make Korean barbecue up at the mountain. And I remember feeling that was embarrassing. But we got up there and my mom said, be one with the mountain. And at first I thought, what does that mean? But it was this understanding that in some ways we were all interconnected. And at first I thought, like, I'm not one with the mountain. I'm a 10-year-old. But I saw this tree, the trees on the mountain. I realized that those trees are separate from the mountain, but they're actually all part of this mountain. And in a sense, me sitting here right now, if someone's looking up at Mount Rainier, they don't know it, but I'm part of the picture of this mountain today. And it's this sense that of understanding the ways we are all connected to each other and connected to our planet and connected to something bigger than ourselves. That, I think, is an underlying truth in all religions. It has different vocabularies. But I wanted to start with that because it's just one of the ways that my mother's Buddhist philosophy sort of became a part of the way that I understood my Judaism.
And the other thing I remember, too, is about flowing. Flowing with things.
Yes.
And I think, in a way, when I think about one of the things that God teaches in the Christian Bible, maybe also in the Torah, which is don't try to control everything.
Yeah.
Like, flow with it and control what you can, do what you can to be a part of it rather than fighting against it.
I think that's exactly right. And I think that we're very trained to judge every moment as like, this is good and this is bad. But actually, if you take the long game, you never know that sometimes the thing that you think is really terrible in one moment becomes the source of your greatest growth. So you can't actually judge in this moment that you're in necessarily that this is the worst thing that's happened to me. And it gives you a little more equanimity of recognizing there are things that are not in my control. If I have a little bit of trust that things are going to be okay and I'm going to kind of go through this painful moment or whatever it is, it actually might be that thing that you thought was the worst thing that happened could be the source of something that becomes the most important part of who you are.
Right. So I do a lot of mentoring. I'm sure you do as well, especially for younger women. But I tried my latest book when I did. I wish someone had told me. I said we got to talk to the guys too.
That's right.
And a lot of question right now for people is what should they even study? What do they want to do? How to decide what they want to do? And what I thought was very interesting is you said that by the age of 16, you felt the first stirrings to become a rabbi. And I wonder if you could describe what that stirring felt like, because that would. For where you were in your life, who you were, that was, and the fact that there weren't many women rabbis.
There weren't many women rabbis. There were no Asian rabbis. And it wasn't an obvious path at all. But I was 16. I was in Israel for my first trip on a kind of a study program. And the first thing that kind of got me was this sense of studying Jewish text for the first time in a way that like my brain was firing and it like hit my heart in a very different way. And it actually asked the biggest questions of like, why are we here? What is our purpose? What are we serving that's bigger than ourselves? And I thought to myself, there's a job where that's what you're supposed to be thinking about all the time. And it was so compelling to me. But I never saw anyone who looked like me remotely in the Jewish community, let alone in rabbinic leadership. So it wasn't obvious. So it didn't feel like, some people who become religious leaders feel a call. I don't think I recognize it as a calling at that point. And that's often not the way the Jewish community thinks of it. But it was an undeniable tug, even despite myself saying, I don't think I can do this, or my parents worrying that I would never get a job as a rabbi.
Yeah. And what did your dad think of that?
I think my dad was proud that I was so interested in Judaism and connected. But I think that both my parents had seen the ways that I hadn't always been fully accepted by the wider Jewish community and worried that I was going to put myself in a position where I would never be accepted as a Jewish leader. And so that being said, they always championed saying, you can do whatever you want to do. And thank God they supported me in it, even though they worried.
My dad, when I was in, I think, maybe first or even third grade, he got me this yellow T-shirt, and in big black capital letters it said, anything boys can do, girls can do better. It was like the early days of like feminist marketing, right? And you and I are the same age, I noted in the book. And it's interesting because the thinking starts to change when we were little kids. And like young women today, they grow up thinking, of course they can do everything. But that was at the time different for you. I also love the description that you try to bring an invigorating, joyful approach.
Yes.
Tell me more about that.
I think every religion has manifestations in which it can either try to get you to do what you should do that's right because of fear or punishment or kind of an angry God, or it can kind of convince you that you should be doing the right thing because actually this brings purpose and meaning and joy into your life. And it's interesting that especially because I think of music as my first spiritual language, that I helped shape the service at Central Synagogue to be incredibly musical and joyful. And people walked in there and almost too surprised, they say, I didn't know Judaism could be so joyful.
And we're having fun here?
Yeah, I know. And so I think that we have to find ways that we touch our hearts. And we don't, I think there should be a certain healthy dose of awe around religion and awe for what we can't control and for forces bigger than us. But I also think that it can't be that we only ascribe to this because of fear. Right. And punishment.
You write that every one of us carries the heart of the stranger. What do you mean by that?
Well, just a little background, because I think that any one who is a Christian, Muslim, or Jew who descends from the children of Abraham, we all share an origin story. The origin story in the Bible is that when Abraham is called to begin the Hebrew peoples, he's actually called by God, leave your birthplace, your home, and go to this place that I will show you, and you will be a blessing. And when he crosses over, the word in Hebrew for crossing over, Ya'avor, is where the word Ivri comes from. Ivri is literally a Hebrew. So the translation of Hebrew is a boundary crosser in a sense. And there's a sense that God doesn't allow Abraham to become or create Judaism from a place of comfort and home, that he has to actually know what it's like to feel like a stranger. And then, of course, the biblical story of being slaves in Egypt, we say, don't oppress the stranger because we've been the stranger. And you know the heart of a stranger. I think that recognizing that is a source of empathy and creativity and resilience and growth. When I say that everyone has it, I used to feeling like a stranger in the Jewish community was obviously because I had interfaith parents and I look like a Korean, and I am Korean. But when I actually started to dig down and hear people's stories, everyone had a story of like, well, this is why I didn't feel like I really belonged or fit in. And if you go outside the Jewish community, there are so many minority groups today that are feeling, outside or misunderstood. I think that you're also hearing from white men in America who feel like they're being marginalized and misunderstood. So instead of this feeling of pushing people out, making us more tribal and building up more walls, I hope that what this could be is a point of connection, that we actually all have more humanity and more in common if we actually listen to each other. I think we need more of that in America today.
I really love that. And when I was thinking about my own story, like when did I feel like a stranger? That you can look back, and Denver was one of the first to try busing to integrate the schools.
Oh, really?
And so when I was in fourth grade, I had to be bused.
You were bused? Wow.
20, like 15 to 20 miles from my home into the city. And it was just, it was very trying time. But then fast forward, I mentioned I went to a state school. And then I was at the White House, and now I'm the deputy press secretary. And everyone around me went to a Ivy League school.
There we go. Yeah.
And I was like, why would anybody listen to me? One of the things you also talk about, I guess so. You were talking. This is something that I don't think is as big a problem anymore. It's about women who are told they're too ambitious. Yeah. And how you overcame that.
Yeah. When I actually grew up like you, feeling like as a girl, I could do anything a boy could do, and my parents definitely taught me that way. And when I got to college, I felt like, why do we even need feminism? We're all done with this. It's all good. But what I realized is that it wasn't until I wanted to be the senior rabbi and lead a community, which was a position that had not been filled by a woman previous to me in my 185 years of my synagogue's history. It had only been male rabbis. And it was only when I was trying to take a job that had not been filled by a woman, I realized that it always felt easy for me because some other woman had sort of smashed that ceiling for me before. And that was the first time I really experienced a certain kind of pushback that surprised me, because this was 2012 when I was applying for that job. So I'm not sure that it's totally over. I think anytime you're going to be the first in a position that people haven't seen women in, it still takes some adjustment for people. And yeah, I think that's still.
You write about something that I get asked about a lot, is how you approach work-life balance. Your children are grown now, but at the time when you were raising babies, how you think about that, or any advice you have for people that are trying to deal with that now?
I mean, I really love my job, but being a mom is the best thing I ever, got to do. So I don't think that we should feel like, we have to choose necessarily one or the other. It does mean, though, that we're going to have to accept a certain level of messiness in our lives. And that I also would say that there are chapters, I think. And I think that in the earliest chapter, it was part of what I wanted to do. I wanted to be home more than, and it sort of surprised me because I had a mom who was a teacher and worked all through my childhood. But I found myself wanting to work part-time because I really wanted to be present more at home. And then I had in the next chapter in which they were all in school, and it changed. And then now that they're out of the house, I'm in a different chapter. So I think to recognize that it's not just one thing all the time, and that women need to be a little bit more compassionate with ourselves and with other women for the kind of balance. And I also think that it's changed, that more men want to be more present as well. And I think creating more of a culture that enables that too would be helpful.
Our CEO, Suzanne Scott, I admire her so much. And one of the things I very much admire is how she has kept actually a pretty large group of girlfriends connected, and they do a lot of things together. And you write about that as well, about how you have this great network of female friends. Do you have to really work at that? Is it natural? How does that go?
Well, I'm really grateful that some of these friends are friends since college. And so, it's really nice to have some friends that know me not as Rabbi, but just as Angela, and knew me when I was 18 years old. So I don't have to work at that because there's a certain way that I immediately just feel completely known and understood in that context. And then I also have a really great group of friends that are connected to my Shabbat community. Shabbat, I think, is one of the greatest inventions that...
what is that? Dancing, or our mutual friend calls it Thanksgiving every Friday?
Every week, exactly, every Friday. And Dan is actually part of my Shabbat community frequently. That's actually how we first met, was at a Shabbat lunch with our mutual friends for Shabbat. And so it's not even like work, because Shabbat is time with them, and it's time that is completely off the clock, and it's like leisurely lunches.
So for people listening who don't know what Shabbat is, can you describe it and why? Like, I remember in Dan's most recent book, he says everybody should do Shabbat, even if you're not Jewish.
I agree, especially
so what happens at Shabbat?
Yes, well, in the most traditional way, it is the Sabbath, and the Jewish protocols around Sabbath is, if you want to make this a holy day, a sacred day, you have to set it apart. And one of the ways, some of our traditional ways, is, of course, you have a meal. You can go to services but even people who don't go to services, they generally have large family and friends over for a Friday night meal and a Saturday lunch over the Sabbath, which begins sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. And it also includes unplugging from your electronic devices. No phones, no TV, which, boy, is that the electronic Sabbath is such a key right now, especially for kids as well. And, generally you don't run errands or use money. So it really feels like a completely different day than all others. And it's not about producing or being more. It's actually just about recognizing that in some ways, this is the point of it all. Being with people you love, not trying to be ambitious to create or generate. It's just to be. And because of these restrictions on phones, electronics, errands, money, anything, these lunches have a kind of freedom, a kind of sense of leisure and spaciousness that only comes when actually you put those rules around it. And so we end up sitting around a lunch table on Shabbat, and we will just talk politics, gossip, our children, everything, until the sun goes down. And it has created a kind of community that is so beautiful. If everyone did Shabbat, I actually think our country would be different.
Especially the putting down of the devices. But do you do a service on Shabbat?
I frequently do services on Saturday morning, although I'm part of a team, and so I'm not on every Saturday morning. Even though when I am, I still go to lunch at 1:00.
I love that. Do you cook?
No, I'm really grateful that, especially as a rabbi, I'm grateful that I'm part of a Shabbat community that friends do the cooking. Yes.
It's interesting to me that you write this book at this time. Sometimes a book comes out and it just hits the timing just right. I'm sure it probably took you a couple of years to write this, 5 years. So October 7th and the attacks in Israel happened during that time that you're writing this. Also at the same time, we see an increased anti-Semitism around the world, and including here in our country. And you write about intense political polarization and how you believe we could get better. I often am asked, what can we do about polarization? And to me, the question seems so big. And I often say, well, I think that we can only control ourselves. So you have to ask, are you being the best wife, daughter, friend, neighbor, boss, employee that you can be? And if you can answer yes to those, and if all of us did that, then things would get better. But I don't know if that's the right answer, and I wondered what you would tell our audience.
I don't want to, I'm going to sound like I'm so on brand, but I think that churches and synagogues, like religious life, used to be a place where people who had very different political views used to gather, and not just gather, but pray together, sing together, serve people who were more vulnerable than them together. We have a breakfast program, for example, and it used to be where people met in those ways and got to know each other. So maybe they voted differently and had different politics, but they saw each other as good people. And I think that now that we are more siloed, especially with our political views, and not even in relationship with anyone else who thinks differently, it's so much easier to demonize someone if you don't know them. But if you and I vote differently, and maybe we do, but if we serve someone a meal who's hungry, or we sing together and recognize that there's more that makes us connected than apart. Or at the very least, I know you're a really wonderful person. And that is what is missing, more spaces where we can come and know each other as human beings across our lines of difference. And so I think that that's a piece of what I hope we do. And if it's not churches and synagogues where we used to meet, we have to create more spaces where we can actually know each other as human beings.
Well, and that means that people have to be willing to actually meet.
Yes,
I think one
right.
of the big problems, and especially for even younger people, my assistant Kate, who she was dismayed last week when she heard that this high school in Wall, New Jersey, had canceled its homecoming dance because no one bought tickets to
that's
go.
so sad.
Like, they kind of want to hang out in small groups, but they don't want to get together. How do we convince them? They're just it's the phones.
The phones definitely divide us. I mean, it both puts
keep us apart.
It both makes us in our own little place, but it also literally helps sort us into our ideologies and to demonize the other side. So yes, if we could take a Sabbath, and let's just imagine that the world would take a Sabbath from their phones, actually connect, and then actually have to have a Shabbat meal together with someone who thought differently than them. I promise you, like Dan and I don't probably vote the same on everything, but I love him and I respect him. And part of the way I know that is because we share a Shabbat meal together.
Right. So Dan and I knew each other in the Bush administration, and then after October 7th, I also listened to his podcast, Call Me Back, which had been quite a variety of topics.
Right.
I
was just on it this week.
on October 7th, that changed, and it has really become a lifeline for all of us who care about the issue and wanted to know more.
Yes.
And one of the things right after October 7th is I had him here. He was sitting right where you are, and he said for the first time in his life, he felt vulnerable as a Jewish man in New York. Yeah. What would you tell people about that concern, maybe either from people in your own synagogue or in your community, and do we have a chance to make it better?
I share Dan's feeling that for the first time in my life as a Jew, and just in the last few years, I feel vulnerable in a different way, and my community feels vulnerable in a different way. And I think part of the trouble here is, and I think people have a hard time understanding that, because I think that there is a perception of Jews as so comfortable or successful or influential. Some of that becomes a dangerous trope, of course, but that it feels impossible to imagine how could you feel vulnerable. And I think that the very extreme anti-Israel rhetoric that has just become normalized, I think that there can be legitimate ways that people really have trouble with perhaps how the war was conducted or with the Israeli government. But that is, there has been a conflation that and a demonization to such an extent that just actually becomes conflated with all Jews who might support Israel then being genocidal colonialists. Fill in the word. It's like a curse word to be a Zionist in some circles. And when that is allowed, then that actually makes any Jew who supports Israel, which is the vast majority of Jews in America, targets for hate. And sometimes we've even seen for violence. And so I think that is a frightening place we're in. Do I think it can be better? I think it has to get better. And but I don't know exactly what will make it turn. I think some of it is raising awareness, but also some of it is all of us working to educate people on the dangers.
When you were writing this book, Heart of a Stranger, where did you write physically? Like where did you like to write?
I like to write in. I write in Sag Harbor when I'm out with friends in the summer. I really wrote it in fits and starts because it's almost impossible to write it while I was being a full-time rabbi, which is most of the time. So I would steal a month in the summer and write for a while and just get away. I have a friend's house in Connecticut that I go to, but I find it's much easier to write if I can get out of my apartment.
Do you write in silence?
I do write in silence.
Not with music.
Yeah.
I always love that because I'm a writer as well, so I always like to ask people about that.
What do you do?
Silence. I mean, I can't hear a thing. My neighbors better not be bothering me. I typically at our house and at the shore, but also, I made a huge mistake on a project that's not announced yet. I had to rewrite the whole thing, and just like going through the draft. And Peter and I hadn't been on a winter break all year. And so it was mid-May, and we've never been to Bermuda. Let's go. Oh, that's a great place. We'll stay in our friends helped us get a reservation at a place. So we go there. That was the dumbest thing I ever could have done. It's beautiful outside, and I'm supposed to be inside writing.
Oh,
it was
right.
really not smart. It was not smart. So I learned my lesson. I need to, next time I go north and I get a place with room. This place had no room service. I'm like, oh, I should have done something different. When you think about your audience, who is this book for?
I was very grateful that my editor is actually not Jewish and saw that this message had a power to go beyond the Jewish community. And I really think it's anyone who wants to connect both with what it's like to feel like sometimes you've been on the outside, instead of seeing that as a negative, seeing that as a source of strength and perhaps even a superpower for us. But it's also a way for people to actually understand Jewish wisdom in an accessible way. Every chapter is not just the narrative chapter, but actually has a little mini sermon which teaches a Jewish concept. And I think there's such a richness to the Jewish tradition that has helped me and helped me find my story in the biblical story. And I use that as an opportunity for anyone who wants to have an easy way to access Jewish spiritual wisdom to pick up the book.
Did you read the audiobook?
I read the audiobook, and I had 15 musical clips in the audiobook too.
So I am going to listen with my husband.
Oh,
because
wow.
I think that your voice is one that blends your dad, a Jewish man, and your mom, Korean and a Buddhist, into a way to listen and to be quiet. Right? There's some. I say I write in silence. You write in silence. One of the things that is so precious anymore is silence.
I agree.
We don't get enough of it. Everywhere you turn, there's somebody's got something on, and
Right.
I'm a guilty. Put my AirPods in. I don't want to hear anybody. I don't want to hear anything, but I want to listen to my podcast once. But when I have a chance to be in silence, that's when you really get the good stuff.
I totally agree. And in many ways, Shabbat is like the silence of the week for me. And it just kind of clears out all that white noise that is there all the time. And but I think we don't give ourselves enough spaciousness. And
You know what's interesting? You're talking about Shabbat. The Charlie Kirk, who was assassinated September 10th,
yes, tragically.
And I think it's all in his new book, he had, in the recent months, maybe even a couple of years, but in the recent months, really taken to heart to get off of his devices on Sunday, to respect the Sabbath day.
Wow.
And it was part of a new message in the book that he was writing, which was something that Erica Kirk, his widow, has talked about a couple of times, which is on Sundays, he would put his phone away. He was able to think, reconnect. And maybe that is something that all of us could start doing.
It's there in the Bible for all of us. Really, it's not just for Jews to take a Sabbath. And I think we're learning more and more how much we need a detox. Our kids need the detox. It's changed schools when those phones are out of the schools. And I think we need it in our lives as adults too. Yeah.
The last question I wanted to ask you was something that you talk about, and you actually have already mentioned, but I feel like it was a bigger message of wisdom and heart, and that is that God says, go forth, you will be a blessing. Can you also explain, when we mourned somebody who passes, like in like one of the hostages who was killed, the saying is, may his memory be a blessing.
Right.
Is that of the same
Well, it's
root?
I think this idea that we can be a blessing in the world. It's interesting when it's connected back to the first time God says that. It's connected back to when God calls Abraham and Sarah to begin, this new religion where there's one God. He says, go to this place you do not know and you will be a blessing. And it's interesting. It doesn't say you will receive blessings. That's a different thing. That's like saying, don't worry, you'll get riches, you'll get, whatever, children. It actually says you will be a blessing. The idea that we can walk through the world and be a blessing, that you could be a blessing to someone else, that you could offer that kind of light of a sense of there's divine presence in you and you're offering that blessing to me. That is what we get to, that's a gift of the world. And when someone dies, what we do is we say their memory is a blessing, meaning just having known them is a blessing in our lives. And so it's a reminder or a call for each of us to find our better angels and be a blessing for the world.
Well, you certainly are a blessing to
thank
the
you,
world
Dana.
and to us and to the Fox News Rundown podcast. The
Thank
book
you.
is Heart of a Stranger, An Unlikely Rabbi Story of Faith, Identity, and Belonging. Rabbi Angela Buchdahl, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dana.